And by climbing the mountain, you're stepping on the heads of their gods.
The wind is screaming. It's 20 degrees below zero, and you're standing at 21,000 feet, higher than any mountain in North America. You look down and see footprints in the snow, but they're not human. They're massive, almost double the size of your own boot. This is exactly what happened to the first British explorers on Everest in 1921.
George Mallory pioneered the first expeditions to Everest. The world was shocked when he and his climbing partner Sandy Irvine disappeared.
They documented their journey with a camera, taking a group photo that looks perfectly normal. But that photo is a doorway to this exact moment, a moment that experts believe unleashed a story that should have stayed secret. The picture that sparked a monster hunt. It looks like a perfectly ordinary, if old-fashioned photograph. A group of 9 men dressed in heavy tweed jackets and knickerbockers stand proudly against a backdrop of immense, snow-dusted mountains. George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright, once joked they look like a Connemara picnic trapped in a snowstorm. This image, taken in 1921, shows the very first British expedition to ever lay eyes on Mount Everest up close. For decades, it was celebrated as a piece of history. But now, some experts and historians argue this photograph, and the story behind it, should have been locked away and never shown to the public. The reason why is way more shocking than you'd think. It's not about a simple climbing achievement. It's about what they found high up on the mountain, something so bizarre it sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie. During the expedition, while descending from a high pass called the Lakpa La at a staggering altitude of 21,000 feet, the expedition's leader, Colonel Charles Howard Berry, saw something that made his blood run cold. There, pressed deep into the fresh snow, were enormous footprints. He described them as looking like the prints of a barefooted man. But they were gigantic. He claimed they were easily twice the size of a normal human's. It's a wild thought, isn't it? You're in one of the most remote, inhospitable places on Earth, and you find tracks that belong to what exactly? Howard Berry tried to rationalize it, suggesting it might have been a large gray wolf placing its paws over its own tracks, creating a distorted, larger print. But his Sherpa guides knew better. They immediately identified the tracks as belonging to the Meto Kangmi, which translates to the wild man of the snows. They were terrified. Here's a crazy piece of trivia for you. This very moment is the birth of a global legend. When the expedition returned, a journalist named Henry Newman interviewed the porters. He mistranslated the Tibetan word meto as filthy or disgusting, and for extra drama, he swapped it with the word abominable. And just like that, the abominable snowman, or the Yeti, was born and introduced to the Western world. All from this one expedition. So what does this have to do with that innocent-looking photograph? That picture isn't just a snapshot of climbers, it's a picture of the very men who were present at the origin of one of the world's greatest mysteries. They were witnesses. The photo stands as the primary evidence that these men were there, in that exact place at that exact time. Some argue that by releasing the photo and the story, they unleashed a cultural obsession and a hunt for a creature that should have been left alone, a secret the mountain wanted to keep. They opened Pandora's box, but it gets even deeper. The photo itself, when analyzed today, reveals another shocking secret the mountain was hiding in plain sight. But the footprints were only the first clue that something was deeply wrong on that mountain. A 300-mile march into madness. To truly get how insane this 1921 expedition was, you have to picture the world back then. There were no GPS, no satellite phones, no lightweight Gore-Tex jackets. Climbing Everest was less of a sport and more like a military invasion of an alien planet. And here's the kicker. Nobody even knew how to get there. Since Nepal was completely closed off to foreigners, the team had to take the long way around, through Tibet. Just getting to the base of the mountain was a monumental task. They started in Darjeeling, India, and began a grueling 300-mile march. Get this, they had over 100 army mules to carry their supplies, which included everything from wooden crates of food to bulky glass plate cameras. These weren't just simple point-and-shoot cameras, they were delicate, heavy, and required tripods and chemicals for developing the photos on the spot. The men themselves were a strange bunch for such a dangerous mission. George Mallory, who would become the face of early Everest attempts, was an experienced rock climber from England, but he had zero experience in the Himalayas. The team's doctor, Alexander Kellis, was one of the few who had high-altitude experience, but tragedy struck early. He sadly passed away from heart failure before they even reached the main climbing areas. Another climber, Harold Rayburn, got seriously ill, leaving Mallory and a younger climber named Guy Bullock to do most of the heavy lifting. You gotta wonder about their mindset. They were marching for weeks through scorching hot valleys and then onto freezing, wind-blasted plateaus, all while wearing wool and tweed. Their gear was so primitive by today's standards it's almost laughable. They had hobnail boots, thin woolen gloves, and no oxygen tanks. The effects of extreme altitude were barely understood. They were basically human guinea pigs. The expedition's main goal wasn't even to reach the summit. It was a reconnaissance mission. Their job was to simply map the area and find a possible route to the top for a future attempt. After weeks of exploring the massive Rongbuk Glacier, they were about to give up. It seemed like the mountain was a fortress with no way in. But then they made the discovery that would change mountaineering forever. They found a backdoor route up a side glacier that led to a high saddle they named the North Cairn. Standing there at over 23,000 feet, they looked up and saw a path to the summit. It was the breakthrough they were looking for. They had found the way up, but in doing so, they had sealed one man's fate forever. The camera that holds the key. The path to the summit that George Mallory and his team discovered in 1921 wasn't just a route on a map. It became an obsession. It was the very same route he would return to in 1922 and again for one last time in 1924. And that final trip is where the story takes a legendary and tragic turn. On June 8, 1924, Mallory and his young climbing partner Andrew Sandy Irvine made a push for the summit. They were last seen by another climber from below, just 800 feet from the top, moving steadily upwards before the clouds swallowed them whole. They were never seen alive again. Their disappearance became the single greatest mystery in the history of exploration. Did they make it to the top, a full 29 years before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay? The key to solving that mystery might just be a camera. Mallory was carrying a small Kodak camera to document the summit. For decades, climbers and historians have dreamed of finding that camera, believing that if the film inside could be developed, it might contain a picture of Mallory and Irvine standing on the roof of the world. It's funny when you think about it. The legacy of the 1921 photo expedition ended with a hunt for another, even more important photograph. Conspiracy theories have swirled for years. One popular story claims that a Chinese climber found Irvine's body and the camera back in the 1970s, but was ordered by his government to keep it secret to protect the official narrative that a Chinese team made the first ascent from that side. But let's go back to the original 1921 photos. They hold another ghost, another secret that no one at the time could have possibly understood. When modern researchers took those old photographs of the Rongbuk Glacier and compared them to pictures taken today from the exact same spots, the results were horrifying. The glacier has retreated by hundreds and hundreds of feet. The ice has literally vanished. That Connemara picnic photo, meant to be a trophy of exploration, has accidentally become one of the earliest and most dramatic pieces of evidence for climate change in the Himalayas. It's a before and after photo of a dying world. This is another reason experts say it should never have been seen, not because it hides a monster, but because it shows us a truth about ourselves that is far more frightening. But the most uncomfortable truth isn't about ice or old mysteries. It's about why we are so obsessed with them. Looking through a lost lens. Okay, so let's get real for a minute. After all this talk of Yetis, ghosts, and lost cameras, it's easy to think, what's the big deal? It's just an old grainy picture of some guys on a mountain. And you know what? It's a fair question. It's not like the photo itself is cursed, but the thing is, when experts say this image should have never been seen, they're not talking about some ancient hex or a secret government cover-up. The controversy is way deeper, and it's all about the uncomfortable truths this single image forces us to look at today. First up, you have to look at the picture through the lens of history. Let's be honest, this expedition was a product of the British Empire. These men were walking into Tibet, a sacred and sovereign land, not as humble guests, but as explorers from a global superpower. The photographs, while historically priceless, also document a time of foreign intrusion. Look closely at any images from that era and you'll see an unspoken story. The well-equipped Westerners leading the way, and the local Tibetan and Sherpa people who made it all possible carrying the heavy loads. For some, these images feel less like historical documents and more like trophies of conquest, a painful reminder of a time when the world was carved up by empires. Viewing them today feels complicated, even wrong. Then there's the environmental bombshell, and this one is a gut punch. The 1921 photos are an accidental time capsule. They show a pristine, frozen world that simply doesn't exist anymore. When you look at that old picture of the massive Rongbuk Glacier, you're not just seeing ice, you're seeing the ghost of a healthy planet. It was a mighty river of ice, powerful and seemingly eternal. Today, it's a shadow of its former self. The reason it's so shocking is that this isn't a computer model or a fancy graph. It's cold, hard photographic proof of what we've lost. Those climbers had no idea, but they were documenting the before picture of a slow-motion catastrophe. It's an accidental indictment of the last 100 years of human activity. And finally, there's the mystery itself. That photo represents ground zero for our modern obsession with conquering Everest. It marks the start of a chain of events filled with tantalizing, unanswered questions. The Yeti footprints, Mallory's tragic disappearance, these are stories with no ending. The photo didn't create these mysteries, but it is the anchor point for all of them. It kicked open a door in our imagination, pulling us into a world where not everything can be explained away by science. It reminds us that maybe, just maybe, there are still things out there in the quiet, empty places of the world that are beyond our understanding. So should the photo have never been seen? It's a tough call. It holds up a mirror and reflects things we don't want to see, a complicated past, a damaged planet, and mysteries we may never solve. Maybe the real question isn't whether the photo should have been hidden. Maybe it's whether we were ever truly ready to understand what we were looking at. They went looking for a mountain and found a legend instead. Do you think the story of the abominable snowman was just a misunderstanding, or did that expedition stumble upon something truly unexplainable? Let us know your theory in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe for more secrets hidden in history.